your role as a leader is like an architect. You want to not just oversee people, but to have a group of people around you that are designing an ecosystem for the future success. And there are particular areas that I'm strong at and good at, but there are other areas where I know I've got a gap. And so when I first became CHRO, one gap was I didn't really know exec comp. You don't need to have all the answers. In fact, you shouldn't have all the answers. You need to be surrounded by people that have. It's okay to not have the answers, but to surround yourself with people that are better than you in particular areas. And actually the quality of the output and the quality of the solutions are far better than just a homogenous group, or even if you seat yourself in a little cubicle and think that you've got all the answers. That would be the wrong thing, and it certainly hasn't been my style, and I've learned from a lot of other people the power of bringing people together.
Michael, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Very good. How are you?
Oh, good. It only took us how many years to get you on the show, and now you're leaving? I'm only joking. I feel like you avoided me that long, and then now you're here. I'm only playing. What are you going to be doing with your newfound freedom now?
Yeah, so between now and the end of the year, it's really helping Susan, my successor, who's wonderful. She's been in 3 weeks now and drinking through the fire hose. So just helping her with the transition. And I've got a few other projects internal, and then really beginning to look forward to 2026 and still be involved in HR and business in different ways. So
can't keep you away. We can't keep you away. No, I love it. And I know you're already an advisor for quite a few companies already, right? I've seen
that's right
as well.
Yeah.
So you're definitely going to be kept busy. I know this is a personal question, but I want to ask anyway. Why now? You know, because a lot of people, when I talk to them about, hey, you know, they're stepping away from the role. Why now?
Yeah, now was the right time. You know, I've overseen a number of changes, particularly with the CEO transition quite a number of years ago now, nearly 5 years ago, and just, you know, the opportunity to bring some fresh perspectives into the business and into the role. So I've been doing the role now for 9 years, and I feel it's the right time for me personally and professionally to look for a new challenge. And so that's what we're doing. And it's been a very, very seamless, very well thought through transition. And if you're in the role of HR where you're, you know, advising the business about succession planning, you really need to make sure that the playbook is, you're leading from the front. You're really role modeling it.
Yeah, you don't want to overstay over. You're welcome. Right. When you look back on your career in those 9 years, what are you most proud of?
So a couple of things really proud of. One is obviously building a fantastic team around me. I know you've met a number of my team, so I think that's sort of one. Just building up the capability amongst the team that are specialized in particular areas, and really bringing all of that knowledge to support the business. So the team is really one. The other two, one would be around the succession planning. So leading the CEO succession planning quite a few years ago, back in 2020, and that was seamless. Our current CEO, Michael Fraccaro, is doing a fantastic job. And the exiting CEO, RJ Bunga, who's now the president of the World Bank, he also just role modeled what a leader needs to do during that transition year and transitioning out. So that was wonderful. And the business itself was very stable, seamless, and the business continued to grow from then. So that's sort of number two. And then the third one would be around culture, really leaning in heavily around how do we continue to scale Mastercard way and Mastercard's culture to support all the things that are going on around us, and really making sure that the sort of heart and the DNA of Mastercard, particularly the areas that we talk about, decency and decency quotient, is really core in the fabric, and scaling that through the rest of the organization globally. I think they're sort of the three big things I'd sort of call as my highlights.
Yeah, I love that. I was speaking to a CHRO recently has gone through a couple of CEO transitions in the past year, actually, which you can imagine how challenging that is. When you think about that part that you mentioned, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned that you also added into your own transition that you could share with people listening?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is around, this can't be seen as just a single event. It's a process, and there's a sequence in which you have to think about it. So you got to start with, okay, what is the kind of timing that you're looking for? So is it 2 years out, 1 year out, 3 years out? Because that really helps think through around, am I able to prepare some of my own internal successes to get ready for the role? That's number one. Second is, what is the specification? So what is the criteria that we're going to be looking for the successor? And it may be very different to, the role that I've been doing, because circumstances have changed, the environment of work has changed, and therefore we may need different areas of emphasis in the profile of the person that we're looking to bring in. So the profile is really important in the specification. And then the third one is really around, are you going to do it alone, or are you going to partner with someone external to also have a rigorous methodology of actually doing this in a very objective way? And so there have been the three key ingredients that I would say. And then out of all of that is just ensuring that you bring people along the journey through significant milestones, through that 12-month or 18-month program, and keeping an open mind, helping leaders as well, that whoever's coming in to replace you is not going to be like you. In fact, it's better to have someone who has got different attributes and different skills, and being very objective about it, and stepping back at the right time, allowing the process to take its course, and allowing those that are going to ultimately make the decision, but with some input from yourself as well. So they would be some of the things I'd highlight.
Who are the key internal stakeholders that need to be involved in that, and how early should you engage them in the process?
Yeah, so clearly, in the case of the Chief People Officer or CHRO, is clearly the CEO is like a critical stakeholder. In the board, in terms of the CEO succession, so clearly when we're doing a CEO succession, it's the chair of the board, and the chairs of the nominating and governance committee and the chair of the comp committee essentially have a very key input into the process. And then basically it's the full board, because you want to ensure at the end of a decision, particularly for CEO succession, there's a unanimous support whoever the final candidate is that's going to be selected. And it's interesting, where tomorrow is going to be the funeral of the Pope. And you think about, succession planning from who's going to be the next Pope. Slightly different process and approach, but even in cases like that, there has to be support. And, the white smoke at the end when all the cardinals have voted is sort of a vote of confidence about who ultimately is going to be the next Pope. So all of these require thoughtful planning and consideration and support.
Yeah. What would be your best advice for everyone listening about how you communicate this to ensure that it doesn't cause perhaps uncertainty, within the business or external?
Yeah, I think the way every leader needs to think about this is that it's their responsibility. I remember when I first started as the Chief People Officer at Mastercard, I had one conversation with the chair of the comp committee, and he said, Michael, one of the first things you need to be thinking about, even though it's like day one on your job, is thinking about your succession. And I think every leader should always be thinking about their time and what they need to do and how they contribute, but also how they're thinking about the right time for them to be moving on at some point and preparing that team. One of the principles that we talked about, whether it's the CEO succession or my own succession, is ensuring that there's a high-functioning, high-performing team. And you want to ensure that whatever happens, you want to ensure there's a stability at that point of a decision and a transition, because there may be some internal candidates that missed out, and they're going to be clearly disappointed. It's very emotional. But at the same time, you want to ensure that they feel as though they've had a fair opportunity and it's been a fair and transparent process. That's really important as well.
Yeah. And that connects to the second thing you mentioned when I asked you what you're proud of over those. And you've developed, I know many members of your team very well. And one of the things that I've noticed with them is I can tell before I even met you that they were led by someone that allows them to be empowered to make decisions, that they could really show up as their authentic selves, and that you were really leading from behind and letting them have that freedom to. I could just feel that in
yeah.
and it came across even in the way that Mastercard has constantly been innovating and sort of challenging itself to constantly disrupt itself, even down to, you know, what you created with your talent marketplace and some of the areas that you've been really leaders in. Is that something that you were very intentional about from the beginning, as sort of trying not to be your own bottleneck and getting out the way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think my style has always been one of thinking about the role not as a manager, but almost like an architect, right? Your role as a leader is like an architect, and so you want to not just oversee people and obviously have the checks and balances in place, but you want to have a group of people around you that are designing an ecosystem, for the future success. And I took a lot on board myself, knowing that there are particular areas that I'm strong at and good at, but there are other areas where I know I've got a gap. And so when I first became CHRO, one gap was I didn't really know exec comp. And so I was very fortunate. I've had two fantastic heads of reward, and they really filled that void. And so I think there's a sense of empathy and vulnerability that you have to have, knowing that you don't need to have all the answers. In fact, you shouldn't have all the answers. You need to be surrounded by people that have. And I think that's probably one lesson that I've learned along the way, that it's okay to not have the answers, but to surround yourself with people that are better than you in particular areas. And actually the quality of the output and the quality of the solutions are far better than just a homogenous group, or even if you sit yourself in a little cubicle and think that you've got all the answers. That would be the wrong thing. And it certainly hasn't been my style. And I've learned from a lot of other people as well. The power of bringing people together is really, really important.
Yeah. That also requires you to be vulnerable, which isn't something in my early days of leadership was something we spoke about. Right? In the past, you as a leader, you had to have all the answers, make all the decisions. And one of the things I learned the hard way as a CEO is actually my vulnerability is actually one of my superpowers, and actually asking for help and knowing that I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I do need to surround myself with better people that know more than me, was quite a big shift, if I'm being honest, from the way earlier in my career of what I was told it meant to, and it really builds so much trust when you can show that vulnerability to that individual, and it kind of empowers them to go above and beyond and really truly they're truly engaged.
Absolutely. I think you hit on a really important point. There's probably two aspects. One is around this notion about quiet power, that you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. And you want to be the one that makes space for others to be able to have a perspective and to really rise to the occasion. And so if you can create that environment, I think that's a really important aspect of leaders of today, but also leaders of the future, that quiet power. And then the other piece is around, as we all know, that you have in leadership, you have the formal authority or the formal leadership because of the hierarchy, and you have this other dimension, which is the moral leadership. And this is a bit about the what, the why, and the how. And so you're in a position where you have to make a decision because that's where you are on an org chart. But if you take an example like return to office, CHROs are still talking about return to office, and some CEOs are still talking about it. You can mandate it, and you can require people because that's your role and you have the prerogative, but you get a much better outcome if you inspire people. So one is require or inspire.
I love that.
And so I think as we think about leadership, there will be times where you do need to require people to do something. But if you can find that other dimension of leadership, which is really inspiration, that's the whole winning the hearts and minds of people, you get a much better outcome and you get much greater followership as well. And I think that point that you mentioned about vulnerability, we never really talked about it, even up until 5 years ago, before the pandemic. It was seen to be a sign of weakness. Now it's actually seen as a sign of strength, that you can talk about, gaps that you may have and areas that you may not be strong in. And I think that's a really important, and I think it really does show a level of authenticity in your own leadership. And that's what you want with your team. And that's what your team are looking for as well.
Yeah. I think like that was one of the things during the pandemic, which was kind of like a veil was lifted where people could see into each other's lives and including their own leadership and be like, oh, you also have problems like me. And challenges, right? Because everyone saw each other was, we were all in the same bucket, whether you were a CEO or someone just joining the business. We were all going through this sort of shared experience, and people kind of the veil of the CEO title and all of the like, oh wow, this person also has challenges with their family, also has challenges with mental health and well-being, and it kind of like, I feel like one of the silver linings, it kind of connected us in a way that we never really were connected before, if that makes sense.
It did, yeah. The stigma sort of left very, very quickly because people started telling tales of the new normal, how they felt lonely or how they felt challenged because they couldn't move. They couldn't go and see their elderly parents, or they couldn't visit, and celebrate a particular event. All of those things really had an impact on people for sure.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this new generation or the next generation of HR leaders coming through? What will they need to lead into, and what do you think the skills that they're going to need to succeed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Some we've already touched on a little bit around, thinking about, formal leadership and this moral leadership, because I do think trust and civility in the workplace are really important ingredients. And if you start to erode those elements and not being able to have honest conversations as well, you erode the elements of trust, the absolute foundations of successful organizations. So I think leaders need to lead with heart as well as their mind. So I think that's really important. I would also say specifically that the world is complex, and I think the role of the CHRO is equally becoming even more complex. And if you think about all the things that are thrown up to CHROs today, so they're having to deal with technology disruption with AI. What does that mean for my function? What does it mean for the organization? Regulatory change. So things like executive orders, as we see here in the US, pay transparency laws. You think about geopolitical tension. I mean, there's just a whole, you just name it. There's just so many. And I think CHROs and leaders in particular just need to think about how do you simplify and make sense of the world and to navigate these complex issues, and therefore really allowing them to just focus on the things that you can control, link it back to the strategy, and really having a clear message and calming people down along the way. I think that's just sort of one. The second one, I think, is we're inundated with a ton of information. And so leveraging data and analytics and insights to be able to either lead a particular change or use that data and insights to think about what are the implications of this for my team and for my workforce. So things like, even if you take things like, the employee experience surveys. Okay, well, it's not just a satisfaction survey. What deeply is happening here that we need to adjust or do differently? Or looking at productivity measures. What is it telling us? There's a whole range of things, but I think data analytics is certainly a second one. And then the third one I would say is just this whole piece around technological disruption. I do think we have to ensure that there's a level of excitement, but measured in the same way there are some mechanisms to guide and to focus on the things that are actually going to help benefit communities and our workforces as well. I think there's still a lot of noise out there, and I think it's sort of distilling that noise and just finding what are the right signals to be able to help bring people along the journey of technological disruption.
Yeah. So just a few things.
Just a few things.
Yeah. Despite all of that, do you think this is one of the most exciting times ever to be in this role?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a super exciting time. And I think, there is a generational shift that we are seeing in terms of new CHROs coming in. And there's a cohort that's sort of moving on like myself. But I think it's an extremely exciting time and period because I think CEOs, boards, investors, they're all looking to not just what the business or what the company is doing today, but how they're building a sustainable future. And a lot of it comes back to your human capital strategy. And I think the impact that CHROs can have today, upskilling, reskilling, all the things that we've already mentioned, there is just such a great canvas for CHROs to paint and to create, the next evolution of change and transformation in the workplace. I think it's super exciting.
Yeah. We speak a lot about, and thank you for sharing those 3 points. I think they're really fascinating, and we could do a whole show on each of those topics. We spoke about the business perspective, but what about for you personally? How do you deal with that personally from a well-being perspective? Because that's a lot, right? And we don't speak about that enough. And I see many CHROs, CPOs that have burned out, especially over the last couple of years. And it's something that we don't talk about enough. How have you maintained a balance both between your work and yourself personally and the family? We know it's not a balance; it's more of a blend at this point. How have you maintained that? What advice would you give to people listening?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, hobbies and passions, right? So I really I enjoy fitness. So I have a routine that I do every day. Whether I'm traveling or not, I always make sure I spend at least 30 minutes a day doing some level of fitness, including yoga, stretching, running, whatever it may be. So fitness is a really important because for me, just being in touch with nature and or just quiet time is really important for me just to be grounded for the day. So that's sort of one. Second thing is I really enjoy reading. And so I'll read novels, I'll read biography, whatever it is. I mean, the last book I read was the Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Mm-hmm. Fantastic book, and it gives you some new insights. I mean, he had the first book of Tipping Point like 20 years ago, and so this is like another edition. Fantastic. So reading helps as well. And then the last one is a new hobby that I've picked up. So I like sailing and so forth in the summer, but coffee, like making real coffee, like espresso coffee, and finding the right coffee beans and grinding it and getting the right mixture. And that to me is going to be one passion point that I'm going to go deeper into when I've got a bit more time. So they're sort of the things. But yeah, I think every CHR, look, there is never enough hours in the day to respond to all the emails you're going to get. And you have to put some boundaries up. You have to ensure that you've got time that you spend with whatever's important for you, whether it's your family or your grandkids, whatever it may be. You really need to set aside time to do those things, because if it starts to erode into those aspects, then I do agree, Chris, that you start to find a decline in your own ability to perform at the best of your game. I mean, just last year, I got one of these Oura rings, and I'm not sure if you've got one, but this is really helpful, and it obviously monitors your sleep, but it also looks at things like, your readiness for the day, and it gives you little prompts. And I think things like that are really helpful. I'm seeing more and more people, getting these wearables, and those little nudges that you get during the day say, hey, maybe you need to take a pause or you need to take a breath. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. For me, it's my Garmin watch, by the way.
Yeah.
And the first thing I do when I wake up, I don't know if this is actually a good thing, is the first thing I do when I wake up is I look at my readiness, I look at my sleep, how much REM sleep did I get, etc. And I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with it, how many steps I did that, did I make my step counter yesterday? I've even got my watch mapped to my scale so I can see my weight. So yeah, I mean, it has become part of my daily life. But I love your point, and I want to spend a few seconds on it, because most of us, and this is just based on my experience speaking to friends and family, when we start pursuing our careers, we forget and put our hobbies and passions to one side. So many people, and also we tell ourselves we're working really hard and doing these things for, in my case, my family, but then but I'm not showing up as a dad and a husband, so I'm just sort of lying to myself and kidding myself that I have to do this, so I have to get back to that email, I have to do that. But to your point, there's always going to be another 20, 30 emails that I need to reply to. So and for me, that led to me having anxiety attacks and burning out, and I would have 6 months of solid work and then burn out for a month, and then so it was a vicious circle. And I've recently started to put some of those boundaries in place to make sure I turn up to tennis practice, jiu-jitsu practice with my daughter, to actually explore some of those hobbies and revisit now some of the hobbies I loved growing up, and understand that I can have both.
Yeah.
I just have to choose
Yeah.
to have both. It is, and those that say that don't have enough time, there will never be enough time. To your point, there'll always be something. If you look at it through the thing of I need to have an empty inbox and no meeting scheduled, then you're never going to do anything. So I love the fact that you shared that with everyone. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, we talk about life and how fast it is, and sometimes we think we are like machines, but we're not. And there's this concept around, if you press pause on a machine, it does stop, right? But when you press pause on a human, actually things start, right? Because the pause allows you for reflection. It allows you to think clearly. It allows you to re-energize. And I think that needs to come into any kind of leadership development program or well-being program, to give permission to people to just stop. And it's okay. And it's okay to switch off your emails at night. It's okay that you don't respond immediately, unless there's something really critical. There are things that you just know that pausing actually is a really good habit to have. And so taking time off to be able to see your kids play and perform, or whatever it may be, actually is part of that pause, that you step back from the day to day.
Yeah. Actually, on Wednesdays I started this maybe like a year ago, I schedule time. On Wednesday, I have like a no meeting Wednesday, and it just gives me time to just reflect and take a step back, and not focus on the business rather than being in it all the time. And that's really helped. And I think very quickly to your point, like that was one thing that happened during the pandemic, because everyone was at home. They had this opportunity to reflect and be like, is this really what I want to do with my life?
Yeah.
And I'm sure we all had this, like I had friends, family members changing careers and, saying this is no longer what I want to do, because it was for the first time they actually had a moment to just stop and reflect and say, is this aligned with my why, my purpose, and my family, my values? And a lot changed.
A lot has changed. Yeah. No, it was a lot of time for people to do the self-reflection.
Yeah.
And I think everyone did go through that period of just questioning, their why. So I think and I think it's better to have that happen yourself, that you're versus an event that happens where it's forced on you, that you have to then take time off. For example, if there is a restructuring and you're unfortunate that you lose your job. I mean, sometimes it's forced, and that actually becomes quite difficult and actually can lead to a lot more anxiety. But if you put it as part of your practice, I think it's a really important thing to do. The other thing you mentioned about, being intentional, we also have at Mastercard, we do meeting-free days every quarter on a Wednesday, typically. And we did that during the pandemic, and we've just continued that practice.
Nice.
And just to have that one day every quarter for folks to know that there's no meetings, but to allow them to take that time away from the frenzy to do the things that are important for them, still meaningful. But it's just one of those things where people will write to me and say, this is just great, Michael, because we've just been able to do X and we've been able to focus on something. It just gives people that, again, permission to feel that it's okay to do that, at that particular point in time. And so it's a system that I think you have to build.
That also sends a clear message from the business to them that you truly mean it when you think about, we want to prioritize your well-being. Like, it's a very clear message.
Yeah.
that you're and it's a message of trust as well, right? That you're putting, and the fact that you continued it beyond the pandemic, whereas many companies kind of reverted back and took away a lot of those things. As well. And I'm sure out of that, the memories that people will have from those days, a lot of innovations probably come out of those days where people have had time actually to reflect and think about some new ideas or things that they weren't working on that were passion projects that would probably then end up benefiting Mastercard along the way, right? Because you're just not in the thick of things constantly all the time. I love that. I think we should definitely do more of that. And these are things that don't cost huge sums of money, right? Like, these are small things that make a huge difference.
Yeah, they're low cost, high value, and people appreciate it. So I think those things are really, really good. I mean, the other thought, if I'm thinking about the future of work and where this potential conversation could go regarding well-being, you could see companies beginning to adopt more institutionalized radical sabbaticals. So the idea of sabbatical every 5 years. And giving people permission to take 2 months off or 3 months off, fully paid, and that will allow them to reflect and to get energy and to come back, recharged, and will lead to, again, long-term performance. And it's a future of thing. I'm not saying wherever Mastercard's thinking about this, but in my own mind, as I think about where is this space potentially going, those kinds of things could be practices that could be adopted by forward-thinking organizations. So to say, hey, and I know some organizations already have sabbaticals, some are paid, some are unpaid, but I think that could be a real great practice to continue this momentum of change in this area.
It's so funny, you just brought back a really fond memory. I kind of had my own forced radical sabbatical in my previous job. I was there for 10 years and I'd never took a holiday in about 5 years, and I had accrued all of the holiday. So I had like 3 or 4 months worth of holiday, and the HR team said, if you don't use this, you're going to lose it. Yeah. So I was kind of forced, I say forced because I really enjoyed my job very sadly, and I was really, my whole self-worth, unfortunately, was wrapped up in my job, and I'm not ashamed to say that at the time. So it was always an unhealthy relationship. So I ended up having like a 3-month break because I had to use all of this, and I can say I came back a completely different person.
Yeah.
Because I started dancing again. I grew up breakdancing. I started skating again. I grew up playing ice hockey. I started spending more time with friends and family, and I just, my well-being improved. And when I came back, and I remember my team saying, "It's like, who is this person? Like who are you?" Right? So it was like it was kind of forced upon me at the time. I remember not being happy when I had to leave as well, but it was a game changer. I think if I didn't do that, I would have probably burned out and probably left the business earlier. So hopefully that'll be really interesting to see. I think the way in which the way we work is changing. I think it could make that possible. If you look in the previous hierarchies and structure, the way we do work, it wouldn't have worked. But now we're kind of moving to like project-based work and skills-based. You can afford to have someone walk away, because then you can kind of architect the right team and skills around it to continue to work, because that work is not owned by a person or a function. So I think the way, especially Mastercard's a perfect example, the way you look at the way work's done that could make that possible. The old ways of working, it just wouldn't have worked in the traditional structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean the traditional way is very linear.
Yeah.
So it's a 0 and a 1, whereas I think the future is going to be a lot more agile, and you can break down components of a job by tasks that people have, and then you try and match those tasks to skills that people may have in the organization. So you'll be able to do it in a different way for sure.
What do you I know I'm not. I know you're still going to be in the space, but the role of CPO at Mastercard. What are you going to miss the most?
Well, I think the thing that I'll miss the most is obviously the team. Whether it's my current team or whether it's the leadership team. Those kinds of things are not going to be there. Because I'm not going to go into another operational role in the foreseeable future, kind of thing. So those aspects I will miss. I just enjoy being around people and really seeing them grow. And so that opportunity, I'm going to have to do that in a different way. But those kinds of things. So they're probably the two things. I really enjoy visiting our offices around the world as well. So we've got offices in all these different exotic locations, and meeting people and the customers in those things. That's also. But I'm not going to be in a point where I'm going to woe is me kind of thing. It's like I had my time and it was wonderful, and I'm blessed that I had this opportunity. And now it's time for someone else to take the baton and take it to the next level. And so my focus is not looking in the rear vision mirror. It's to look through the windscreen and say, what's down the highway? And I'm more driven now by what's ahead of me and the future of work, and the capabilities that HR is going to need to embrace to go to the next step. I think it's exciting. I want to be a part of that and helping others within the HR community to continue to grow and develop in those spaces.
Amazing. Last question before I let you go. You've already shared so many great pieces of advice, but for those HR leaders of tomorrow that are going to be sitting in your seat one day, what's one thing you'd share with them that you wish you knew when you sat in the seat, before you sat in the seat?
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing would be, this is a role that has a tremendous amount of responsibility and impact, and to never underestimate the importance of this particular role. And if you think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people always would say, does HR have a seat at the table? Those conversations don't have anymore. But I think it's important to talk about the responsibility and impact you have, and also ensure that you're always at the center of thinking about what can you do for an individual, as well as how you can scale that for an organizational level. And you've got to make sure you can do both. You need to be able to still have the door open and allow people to come and talk to you and grieve or whatever it may be. But you also have to have this responsibility around, how am I driving impact for the future of this organization as well? And so you're not just an HR leader, you are a leader. You're a business leader, an enterprise leader, and you need to be able to connect the dots and really think about enterprise, but doing it with a heart and a soul at the end of it. I think they're the really important things to remember.
Amazing, Michael. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm so happy we managed to have you on the show. Congratulations on everything. And this is to the new beginning ahead. It is. So yes. Super. I'm so excited for you and happy for you for what's next. And where can people connect with you? The best follow you on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yeah. LinkedIn, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I wish you all the best until we next speak, and it's super fun to have you on the show, and appreciate your advice and guidance.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all that you do for HR.